All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone that are with us over the internet. It's always nice to be here today. Another summer Sunday with the beautiful weather outside. Actually, not too hot today. It's just perfect. And it's always good to have you all here today for another lecture. Our lecture today is going to be about the law of justice, love, and charity. And it's going to be given to us by our friend Marco. And but as always, before we start our lecture, we're gonna have our friend, our beloved friend, Danny, coming to do the initial prayer for us.
The reading.
The reading. Oh, sorry, the reading, not the initial prayer. Sorry, the reading.
It's a short lecture.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
Good morning.
Today we're going to be talking about the book Happy Life. Your happiness is possible. Believe in this and work with passion. To achieve it, do not invest yourself in things, places, or people and avoid disappointment. Happiness is an inner state which arises from the well-being afforded by a dignified and peaceful life. Even if you lack money, high social position, or health, you can be happy, living with resignation and confidence in God.
Thank you, Danny. And now let's have our initial prayer. Let's close our eyes, elevate our thoughts to God, our Creator, to Jesus, our Master of Love, our guiding light, and to all the spirits present here today, the incarnate and discarnate ones. We ask you to be with us throughout this lecture. Open our minds and our hearts for the new learnings. And we ask you to give our brother Marco the clarity of mind so he can give us the best of his, so we can learn a little bit more today than we knew yesterday. Thank Jesus. So be it. Marco.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, so today the topic that was selected is about the law of justice, love, and charity. And this is interesting because, just a quick kind of recap of the divine laws, right? So the divine laws are this perfect, immutable, essential rules, right, that govern the entire universe and our existences, right? And there are 10 of those laws, right, that we talk about in Spiritism. And the first one is law of worship. So in other words, like worshiping God with the Creator, right? Law of labor, which means that we got to work, like we got to work with things. We got to work for evolution. We got to work to help others. Law of reproduction, meaning that we have to keep our existences continuing. In other words, like we have to continue to procreate and recreate, like as part of our physical body in this planet, right? The law of preservation, that we have to take care of ourselves, right? We have to preserve our bodies, our existences, each other, like our environment, right? An interesting law that's called law of destruction, which basically means it's actually almost like a physical law, is that everything has to be renewed, reshaped, and reformed in order to progress. So the destruction meaning that things sometimes have to be torn apart to be recreated and evolve. So that's part of what we call law of destruction. The law of society, which is an obvious one, like it means that we're created and we're designed to live in society. So we need each other. We need each other to learn, to help, to put in practice what we learn from God and what Jesus taught us. So it is interesting that, there in many instances, you can have this idea that someone could be, completely isolated and learn and live in a complete isolated state where like doesn't interact with anyone, doesn't live with anyone, like like for example some monks and some people have to take away and go to a very far place and live in complete isolation. But even in that technical isolation, you're still connected, right? So there's still we're still bound by this planet and the interaction with the planet. And for you to really grow, like even if you're really elevated and you want to live in isolation, at some point you got to put in practice all of that you're thinking about and that you're learning, right? And to put in practice, you need people, right? So you're not going to put in practice love if you're not having anyone to love and be loved, right? So that's why in our state of evolution, particularly, it's so critical to live in society. An essential law is called law of progress. And this is interesting because basically the law is that everything will evolve, like everything, not only us, but our planet, our soil, our trees, the sun, like the entire universe is progressing, right? And this is probably one of the most fundamental aspects of spiritism is that we can't turn back, right? Because from other concepts before and other ways of understanding religions and gods and divinity in general, people used to think that, well, there's like a positive and a negative kind of thing. So in other words, you can do positive things or you can do negative things and get worse and worse and worse, right? So spiritism brings this entire new concept. Is like basically there's no turning back. Even when you're doing something wrong, you're actually learning from it and you're moving a step forward. Even if you don't think so when you're doing it, right? But if you look at a time scale of our creator, we are all moving, right? Even if you're moving tiny, tiny baby steps, or you're moving like a sprinter on a race, you're still moving forward, right? Even if you say, I do not want to progress, you're progressing. That is kind of, actually some philosophers killed themselves because of this, because they could not live with the concept that, they cannot control their own thoughts and their own progress. Isn't that crazy? So, so there are many interesting stories about it. I don't have time to go through all of this, but the idea is, and I can give an example. Gregorio, for example, one of the very well-known spiritists in the book Liberation, is that he isolated himself. He turned himself into this sort of like an evil-looking like spirit, right? Controlled masses of spirits in the in the pits of the what people used to call hell, right? So basically in the underground of this, living all this masses of negativity and negative thoughts, a very dark environment. So a lot of spirits and suffering, all connected to this spirit. And he continued to kind of rule as a super powerful entity of negativity and bad, right, in general. But reality is he was not, right? And it all changed when he met his mother, right? And think about this, like this super powerful evil spirit, according to the way it looked like and the way he behaved. Even that spirit, after thousands of years of living that, he met his mother, right? And this is the final part of the book. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but even in that moment where he exchanged those words and he see his mother and the love of his mother touched his heart, he deconstructs the entire image he created to prevent himself from progressing according to the eyes of whoever was seeing that moment. But then you realize that even in that moment, he's still moving forward. Even when he was being mean and evil, he was moving forward, and we couldn't see it, right? But it's a slow process that was happening inside of him, right? So even that you can't fight, right? So the law of progress is incredible. It's not the topic of today, so I'm going to have to move quickly. So law of equality. So we're all created exactly the same. We're all created as spirits who have this incredible ability of grow and write our own pages, right? Like a book, right? Without words on it, right? We're all empty pages when we're created. And we're simple and ignorant, but not in the way we understand the word today, but more as if we have a lot to learn. That's what the word means, really, right? And we're giving like a blank, like we're giving all tools, all abilities. We're giving our free will. We're giving a colorful pencil or a black pencil or or a pen or like a highlighter, whatever you want to write on that book, you can do it, right? And if you write it wrong or if you scribble it or take a page out of it, you're still going to finish that book, right? So that's kind of the interesting part. And that's going to change from your first page to, I don't know, there's no last page, but that's a very long book, as you can tell. But we go into these moments of evolution. So, and we're all created with the same abilities, the same way, and with the same ability to grow and to continue these roads, right? We take very different roads though, right? But and therefore we all the same family, we're all brothers and sisters. If on earth we have to separate that, but reality is spirits don't even have gender or sex, right? So that's kind of an interesting way of putting it, but we're all the same, right? So that's exactly what the law says. The law of liberty, which is misinterpreted very often, which liberty means not having the ability to do whatever we want, right? But actually following the next law, which I love when they come kind of together like that. Liberty really is having the law of justice, love, and charity inside of us. Because when we do have those three, which is one, I'll show you why. When we have that inside of us, then we're free. Because then we have the divine laws really summarized inside of us. And then we can really do things, right? We can be completely free, right? To love, to grow, to help, right? And that's really what liberty is. And it's not the liberty that we see most often, which is this concept that, yeah, I'll do whatever I want kind of thing, because there are boundaries to that, because the law of society, like we live together. So you're actually not free. You're only free really on a day-to-day basis when you're thinking. And you know that because whenever one of those kind of strange thoughts come to your mind, you can't get rid of it. Right? It's like, I want to shake it. No, I want to get rid of it. No. So even when we're thinking good things or not so good things, so you can see how your thought can run like this free highway, right? And you learn a lot about yourself when you pay attention to those thoughts, right? One about what's coming from you, what's coming from influences around you, right? And what you really have inside your heart, you can tell a lot. So that's a moment you can be free. But reality is that the freedom and the liberty here comes with a responsibility. And that's another topic, another lecture, not for today. Okay, so we're going to come to the final one, which is really, I call it the big summary, right? It's like almost like when we're doing a lecture, right? So we start talking about all those things. And then at the very end, you say, okay, if you want to remember one thing for the entire lecture, like for the last hour or so, focus on the next two slides, right? I was teaching my students, right? Your questions are probably going to be from the next slide. That's kind of where we are. So the law of justice, love, and charity is kind of that big summary of everything, right? Because even if you don't really understand what law of destruction is, it doesn't matter, right? Because if you follow the law of love and charity, who cares? You don't have to worry about it, Don't worry, right? And I think that's why it comes last, and it's 3 in 1, right? It's like this big, big summary, right? Of everything. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? So a little history about this, right? So in the very beginning, so when our human or humanoid bodies started to develop, right? The biological side of things. Obviously the spirits or the spiritual principles that were inhabiting that early developing body had really no sense of what we're talking about today, right? The law of justice and things like this were not connecting well with the very, very early stages of development, right? So there was a lot more instinct, right? Survival, right? Ability to thrive and reproduce, like the other laws we talked about, right? So the preservation, right? That's like almost like an inherent principle of any life form, right? so that you can see that in any animal, right? In any insect, right? It's very simple. Like, even like the earliest life forms, if you put fire close to them, they'll run away from it, right? That's a preservation instinct. So that's what the early laws we talked about is. So that's present through basically the entire spectrum of evolution, right? So for biologists, like, I was also trained as a biologist at some point. We like to compare. So it's comparative analysis of development between certain life forms and our bodies, and it's interesting how Spiritism connects that in an interesting way, right? Because some of the early divine laws we talked about, or you can see much early on in the spectrum of biological evolution, and the later ones, like justice, law, love, and charity, you can only see in a very, very more evolved, higher forms, like what we're discussing today, right? But let's say, like, recent history. Let's not go back to the early life forms. That's going to be too much. I don't have, 5 hours, right? to talk about that. And I'm not at my lecture in university. Okay, so the one of the early ways of understanding justice, I think everyone can understand here, and all of us can feel it because it's still kind of inside of us, right? Is the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? And that is around the Mosaic time, actually a little bit before that, so several thousands of years ago. We have this concept that, well, justice means, like, if something happens to you, you can kind of symmetrically or diametrically opposed reaction directly to that. So if there's a particular type, so an eye for an eye. So if someone kills another person, the other person can kill the first person, and vice versa. It becomes kind of a cycle of destruction, right? But that was the idea of justice, right? So if someone steals something for you, you can do that. Or if you steal something, you cut an arm off. In other words, you can't steal again. That very barbaric type of understanding of justice, but it worked and it prevailed in society for thousands of years. So we're thinking about this. So, so I think if you guys, so our current laws, how old are they in Canada? Like the all the codes that we live by in Canada, how old are they? Yeah, right? Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Less than 100 years, right? So if you think about, they're derived from the Carta Magna in British law, so that goes a little bit further, like maybe several hundred years, right? The idea of the eye for an eye is actually 3,000 years old, right? And it survived for over 3,000 years in society, right? So you see how we're evolving. Actually evolving fast, right? That one, like a time. Then now we're talking about 10, 20 years, and soon it's going to be much faster than that, right? Now laws can change like overnight, if you think about that, right? But it will prevail, right? So that was the sense of justice. And then obviously when Jesus came and incarnated, right? He came and he said this very clearly, I'm not here to destroy the law, right? He said that very clearly and loud for everyone to hear, right? But reality is, like, he was actually changing the law quite significantly, right? But he was right. He was not here to throw like a little bomb on that law. It's like, boom, like we're going to change the whole thing. Like, I'm the reformer of the world. No, because he knew the only way he could change that so barbaric and aggressive way of dealing with justice is to be the beacon of light, so people can look at it and say, wow, okay, between that and this, I would rather do that, right? So that's true. He was not destroying things, right? But he was implementing this little seed that we all carry here in this room today, which is the concept that justice really is respecting the rights of others. Isn't that crazy, huh? So we came from a point that justice was like harming another person as hard as I can, right? To compensate what was done. To this concept that we're studying today is like justice is respecting the rights of others. Because it's easy. Like if everybody's respecting the rights of others, your rights will be respected by everyone. That's automatic. So you don't even have to worry about that, right? And that is question number 875 in the Spirit's book, right? And this is one of the best summaries of what actually justice is in the context of Spiritism, right? But then Allan Kardec continues, and the next question, 876, he asks, well, okay, so, well, we know human law, right, which is kind of this drafted version of what the divine law is, and we're kind of moving it closer and closer to what the divine laws are, right? Is there any other basis of justice that we can use on day to day? So the Spirit's very straightforward answer, well, you know it, right? Christ told you, right? So do unto others as you would have them, others do unto you. In other words, that's another easy principle, right? That we're still learning today. Also what justice is, right? What justice is that, well, if you really want to think about how you want to be treated, so treat others the same, right? So this one we're still struggling, right? And we do it certain times of the day, and we not do it all the times of the day or times of the year or scenarios, right? So we're still kind of getting there, but we got better at it, right? We are getting better at it. Because if you think about, now not going back to Mosaic time, let's go back to, maybe just about, let's say, 1860s or so, right? And then to 1960s, where the civil rights movement, right, in the United States kick up. So from early stages of exploration of Africans and slavery and, to the civil rights movement, you think what happened in that 100 and something years, right? That's a big transformation from what we are today. And this is one example of how things have changed relatively fast-paced compared to before. We're still struggling with it, but we're moving in the right direction. And that is basically the principle that we're talking about today, right? So treating others the way you expect to be treated, right? So do we have problems today? Oh, yes, we have a lot of problems. We know all of that, right? We don't have to go into details, but our society still lives on a structural racist system, right? That's hard to see. It's very subtle. It's there. And that there's always a gender gap bias, sex bias. There's like a race bias. There's a color skin bias. There's all these problems that our society are struggling with, right? But all of this can be summarized in this concept that, if you really want to evolve, we really start to see each other as equal, right? Law of equality, and treating each other the way we want to be treated, which is the law of justice, right? So again, if you really so that's what we talked about in the beginning. If you really put the divine laws inside our heart and say, okay, this is how it's going to be now, that is really what Spiritism wants from all of us, right? Is to have that transition taking effect, incorporating that inside our hearts, right? So that's the justice part of the just, love, and charity, okay? So now, there's another part of this is interesting too, is that, okay, we can argue that we all understand that, well, we got to follow divine laws, got to love each other, got to help each other, and all those things. Like, this is like widespread things, right, that we talk about all the time, not only Spiritism, any religion, non-religion. Like, if you a talk show on TV, if you turn on, someone's going to say something, yeah, we got to kind of be helpful to each other, kind of thing. So this is a widespread concept, right? But there are other things that are more difficult to understand. And one example is the idea that, well, we've all been colonized by Christian churches in general, right? The majority of the Western Hemisphere, right? So Canada is a great example, right? It's colonized and by Catholic Church primarily, and then, a number of other religions that came after. But so there was a slight issue that evolved after that initial colonization, was the concept that you're going to be punished, right? The punishing God, right? Hell and heaven, right? And how the justice from God seemed kind of strange to our eyes, right? Because in early religions and certain religions that are today, if you closely follow in a very tight understanding of the scripture based on their interpretation, is that God will actually punish us quite hard, right? In a way that, for example, if I sin, right, according to the description, or in other words, if I deviate from the divine law, let's put it this way, I'm going to be sent to hell, right? Which is basically suffering forever, right? Which is very disproportionate, right? And one thing we know is that God is perfect, so that cannot happen, right? So how does divine justice now? So we're talking about divine justice. How does divine justice act? So we can see this every day. We can see people, having accidents, diseases, and suffering, and things going wrong in their lives, and all those things happening all the time. If we focus on those little issues that are happening throughout the entire society and wars and things like this, it's easy to throw that all up above into God's lap and say, okay, this is all issues with the divine justice. This is not fair. This is not right. And I see that's why people are losing their connection to God, because it's understandable, right? If you present to someone the idea that God is really some sort of all powerful being that kind of plays with us and punishes us all the time and does all this kind of illogical things as some sort of a punishment, that is hard to swallow for most people. And I totally get it, right? I was looking at a TV show one of these days, and there's four people talking about God, and then one of the individuals was really like not atheist, but it's almost like an anti-God, like more than atheist, right? Um, and the whole principle that he used to sustain his thesis is that, if you believe that God exists, then, why do we explain all the suffering, right? And that is really interesting because that is, again, attributing that everything that happens is God's fault, right? So taking away our responsibility, kind of move it up to somewhere, right? And say, oh, this is a problem. This is what's happening. And this is really the hardest thing to change in any person, is making sure that we understand that what happens to us is really our responsibility. Not now, though, right? It may have happened a long time ago, right? Maybe something that was completely unrelated to what I've done, or maybe that's something that I supposed to. It doesn't matter, but see, in the end, we are responsible for our actions, right? And then Allan Kardec, in the Gospel According to Spiritism, summarizes it quite nicely. So he writes in chapter 10, 11, so why do you measure divine justice according to your own? So Kardec is asking, right? Do you think the Lord inflicts you with cruel punishments out of mere caprice, like, just like for fun? Nothing is done without an intelligent purpose. And no matter what happens, everything has its reason for being, right? So Spiritism now brings this big beacon of light into this problem, right? Because in Spiritism, now we know, right? So God, who's supremely just and good, grants to the spirit as many chances as needed to reach its objective, perfection. In other words, yes, we're going to run into trouble. We're going to have a chance to fix it. Sometimes we're not going to be able to fix it in a nice way. We have to be literally thrown in a scenario that we have to push it through and learn with it. But one day, we're going to have a million chances or more. One day, we're going to get there in the other end, and we're going to be perfect. Law of progression, right? We talked about this, right? Now, if you take that now, see the clear difference now. One side, God is punishing us. It's all someone else's responsibility, like not me. Like, God is not just, right? That's one side. The other side is, that we're talking about today, is this concept that, well, we're responsible for our actions. We're going to have as many chances as possible to learn and to grow, and one day we'll be perfect. Remember that Jesus, when he came as a beacon to fight against the idea of eye for an eye. So that's exactly what's happening again. Now we have two options in front of us, right? Believe in this concept that's been prevailing in society for such a long time, that God is punishing us constantly for any tiny little mistake we do. Or we believe that by taking responsibility of our actions and learning from them, is taken as many times and help as needed, because the divine justice and divine providence will help us. They'll give us any tool. They'll train, they'll teach us, like we do with any other kids or anyone else, right? And one day we'll be perfect. Those are the two options we have, right? So that makes it a lot easier for us to grow as a person, right? Take away from our shoulders that heavy weight that we put all the time, right? For every little mistake, everything we do, right? So now we have this beacon of light, right? And then in the book Heaven and Hell and the Divine Justice, that's what the book's called, according to Spiritism, Allan Kardec will continue and say, with each new existence, the spirit brings what it had acquired in the previous ones in terms of aptitudes, intuitive knowledge, intelligence, and morality. Each existence is thus a forward step in the path of progression. There you go. We're all moving in the right direction. Okay? And now, if you continue, so Heaven and Hell is a great book because you can read the stories of the spirits describing their existences at the second part of the book, right? And if you focus on the hardened spirits, for example, that's actually a very, very nice learning experience, right? Because, for example, they'll talk about their own issues, their own mistakes, and how they're dealing with it, and how they're learning, and how they're progressing, right? And there's so many. La Pommeraye, for example, one of the spirits, talks about what we just discussed in the beginning. I was talking about someone cannot hiding away from their own thoughts. That's his punishment. So see, that's interesting, right? So the idea that he cannot hide from his own thoughts is actually part of the way he's being punished. In other words, he's learning from that perspective, right? So it's a very interesting story if you want to read on that book. Okay, so that's the justice part. Easy summary. Yeah. So the divine justice is perfect, right? We are responsible for our actions, and we should respect others, right? That's the concept of justice. Okay, the rights of others. Right. So love. That's the easy parts to understand. Not so easy parts to put in full practice, though, right? So, in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 11, there's going to be this, chapter 10. So, there's going to be this passage that Kardec's going to say. So, in the deepest sense of the word, to love, what it means, right? It means to be loyal, honest, conscientious, in order to do unto others what you want them to do unto you, right? So, that's what love means. We barely understand the idea of love nowadays because there's 100 million different meanings of love, right? But this is the real one, right? It means searching around yourselves for the inner meaning of all the hardships that oppress your brothers and sisters, so that you may bring them relief. See, love is about others too, right? Not about yourself, but also about others. It means regarding the great human family as one's own. So really, really understanding and feeling and looking at another person, understanding that we are all family, right? We are all in this together. Right? For you meet this family in certain time and more advanced worlds, and the spirit who composes it are, like yourselves, children of God, destined to evolve forever. That is from the Gospel according to Spiritism. Right? What about charity, right? So there's three parts to this law, right? Charity. So question 886, Allan Kardec is going to ask, Spirit's book. So what is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it? Right? Again, benevolence towards everyone. It's a tough one, right? Because, we kind of understand the word charity nowadays is like, I'm going to give something to this person or to that person, right? I'm going to help this one or I'm going to help that person. But the spirits are not going to, they're not talking about, this is tiny compared to actually what charity is. This is like a tiny, like less than 1% of what charity is, right? Charity is benevolence to everyone, right? Indulgence towards the imperfections of others and forgiveness of or offenses. That's a lot, right? So, in this one question, the spirits are literally going to transform what the word charity means to most of us, right? So, when you say hi to someone on the street in a nice and projecting some good thought, not hi like hi, I don't want to see you again kind of thing we do sometimes, or sorry, like instead of punching, you say sorry, right? That doesn't count, right? Or like pushing someone and saying sorry, which is technically what a lot of people do. It makes no sense, right? You know, but intentionally doing something and putting a sorry there just kind of to mask it out as you're being polite. What really what really we're talking about is making your life as a state of benevolence constant to every person around you. So that does not mean doing big, ginormous actions. You need those too. That's fine. I know, like I've organized charity things, rides, and I do a lot of things, but those are also little things. Little. They're not the big ones. We tend to think money signs as a big charity act all the time, right? Oh, we've raised like $50 million for that. That's fantastic. But it means nothing if you step out of that and be mean to everyone else around you. Like, what does that mean? That's fine. We don't say it's wrong to fundraise and do all those things. That's fantastic. But if we're not transforming ourselves to be benevolence to everyone, like the spirits are telling here, you go home and you yell at your kids and you do all this mess and then you raise money for charity. One does not cover the other, right? That is not charity. So you're not being charitable, right? So like writing checks to get a tax refund thing, like it's great. Like our system allows that, so we can donate more. That's very good, but that's actually not charity. All of it. That's like probably the smallest part of it, right? Forgiveness for offenses. That's part of charity. Are we doing that, right? See, it gets more and more complicated, right? And I know this is like a tiny little thing, right? But I remember when I was a resident at Toronto General Hospital, and I remember this. There was this admin assistant that sat in a small cubicle right in the corridor, right? So everybody would kind of pass by her all the time, like literally a million residents and doctors and this and that and cases around, you know. And I one day I looked at her and it was kind of odd. Like I had this connection. I was like, so this person's here, and I've never seen anyone saying a single nice word to this person, like just like running around like she doesn't exist. Right? So I approached her. It's like, hey, good morning. It's literally she almost like fell off her chair. It's like like who's this person? Anyway, so I was like, hey, how are you doing? It's like, and then she's like, she opened a smile, right? And then I said, I actually see you here every day, and I actually never spoke to you, and everything, how are you doing? And then we spoke for about half an hour, and I realized that she used to do trail runs, which I was also very excited about because I'm a runner too. And we talked about running the Bruce Trail, and we talked about her life, and there you go. So I left. I was like the happiest person in the world. So charity has this kind of two-way benefit, right? And she was also, very excited. So about a week later, we have a department party not party, but like, like a coffee time type of thing, right? And then she comes to me in the middle of the thing. It's like, that day you changed my entire week. Like I was like this, and that. And that single moment that we exchanged 10 minutes transformed my week. I was like, right? Because we don't understand that, right? I'll be honest. Like to me, it was like, okay, I was not understanding the consequences, like the feedback positive loop, right, that you create and the forward right, motion of your action. But then I realized at that moment that that was true charity, right? That was true. Not that I'm like, oh, look at what I've done, No, I'm not saying that way. And quite the opposite. It's like, why am I not doing this all the time to everyone? I actually felt bad, I felt good about doing it, but I felt horrible about not doing it 98% of the time, right? And that's why I know when I read this passage, I read this quite often, it's like benevolence towards every single person, right? And then after that day, I kind of started to do it more often, right? And you should do it too. You would be surprised how incredible experiences are. So Joyce likes to tell me that I'm like a politician now. It's like I go and talk to it's like I go talk to everyone. I was like, no, I don't want votes. I'm not being, elected for anything, right? But I do go into. So one day, I was on the bus to Hamilton, and at the time I was living in Hamilton, and then this this intoxicated gentleman comes into the bus, and obviously no one wants to have this person sit beside them, right? Because he probably he was living on the streets, and he was going through some issues, and anyways, so the person comes, and there was a seat beside me, and I was like, okay, I'm going to put in practice some of what I'm learning, right? So got it right on the spot. Can't hide, Marco, this is your chance. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna do this, right? So my real old Marco comes in. I was like, okay, maybe I'll scoot around and sit in the aisle seat. So I kind of block the passage, so no one's gonna sit beside me. So the kind of trying to change Marco kicks in. I was like, okay, listen, benevolence to everyone, right? Stop this nonsense. There's a conflict, right? And I'm not saying here that I'm like, hey, look at me, like, look at what I've done. No, the opposite. I was struggling, right? With me, like my own self. It's like, okay, what should I do? Right? So, okay, fine. So he sits beside me, and he was, obviously in a very difficult situation, no question about it. And then he starts talking about, we started chatting, right? As you can tell, I'm kind of chatty. You can tell, I can chat for hours. Okay, I was laughing. So we start chatting, and then he starts in his one way talking about wanting to go home, right? And I'm like, oh, you are going home, and then we actually know where he's from, and he's from a small town close to Hamilton. And kind of halfway through the conversation, I realized that going home means he wanted to kill himself. That's what home means. He wanted to get out of here, right? Then I got this little tap on the shoulder. It's like, okay, remember I told you, it's like, that's kind of my mentor probably just kind of giving me that little kind of kick in the back to say, kind of, sprint it, right? So we need you, right? So we did talk about, so we actually ended up talking about life. And I remember this, it's an incredible experience because here we are in a bus to Hamilton, stuck in traffic, like over the bridge for like hours, right? And I'm the only one person talking to this guy in the bus, which is completely intoxicated, but talking about taking his own life. And the person behind me and the front of it and the side of it, they're all giving me this look. So it's like, stop talking kind of thing, right? And I'm like, okay, I got to do this. So that was charity. Like, I know that now, right? But I didn't know so much like during the time, right? Anyways, I think, I think we all made a positive connection, and he stepped out of the bus, and he was not as in the same state he was in the beginning. So I was happy about it. I'm not saying that I transformed his life and he's a new person and he's the CEO of a company. Of course not. That's not what happened at that time, right? But I like to think that for that 15-minute ride, I did something good to that person, right? Even if it was not meaningful or not logical at the time, or even if it was just like sitting beside him and chatting, right? Even if he didn't understand a single word of what I said, right? But I think I did something, right? And then after that, so basically in every one of those little moments, I kind of learned, right? And I was like, maybe I should do. So that's something I try to do, and I try to talk to people, particularly people that I realize and I notice that maybe want it, like maybe need that, right? Maybe need someone to come by and say, hey, how are things? Like with an open heart, right? You would not believe how many moments like that happen after that, like all the time, to a point that I randomly get people coming to my office now in the universe. It's like, I want to talk. I'm like, and I look at like, I know my mentor's like, okay, I got it. Okay, I know what's going on, right? It's like a fraternal assistance, like on the spot, right? Totally, in a completely different context, like not talking about religion or anything. It's just like someone wants to talk, right? And I would say to everyone, it's like, if you read this tiny little sentence here from the Spirit's: benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards the imperfections of others, right? And forgiveness for offenses. I think you're gonna really grasp the concept of charity a lot more, right? And does it need to be like, it could be your colleague, it could be your family, it could be your kids, right? It could be anyone, anytime, right? It could be, the hardest person you had to have like an argument ever. Like it could be that person, right? I had a moment like this weekend where, I met a person that said some very negative things to me at last year, right? Then I met the person again after a whole year, right? And I had that inside of me. And I was talking to Joyce about it. It was an interesting experience because I was talking to the person, he was being super nice to me. But that energy was kicking in, right? And trying to take control of my mind. I was like, say something, say that. I'm like, no, I can't do that. So it's like, it's not worth it. Should I do it? No, I can't do it. Should I remind me of that? Should I go back to that problem we had? Oh my goodness. Like it was like this intense battle, right? And I quickly realized it's like, and I asked this question, why am I doing this? Right? Because I was trying to rescue out that point that we had a year ago and somehow bring that back in a way to punish and send it back, that energy to that person, right? Where I had a clear chance of doing charity, right? Not financial, material, and all that, but the forgiveness of all the offenses, and kind of, let's take this positive note and make it more positive, right? To both of us. So in literally in 5 seconds, that when I clicked to that idea, in 5 seconds that cloud like disappeared, and all of a sudden I could see the same person with a completely different set of eyes. We went for a bike ride together, super fun, right? We talk about family, right? And then I realized that I was doing exactly the opposite of what am I doing all of this here for, right? We're talking and teaching and doing all those things. It's like I'm not better. I'm quite opposite. I'm probably struggled more than anyone here in this room before. That's why, when I incarnated this time, Jesus and the mentor said, let's give this guy this last opportunity to do something, right? Because it's been hard, right? So it's been really tough. So let's put him to read all these books and do all those things. Maybe he'll get it this time, right? And I think that's why I ended up here, right? I'm still struggling, but still there, still going. Okay, so and then to finish now because we're almost running out of time. the book Leaving Spring, which is again another fantastic book if you wanna read, Emmanuel by first Chico Xavier, and there's one story that's quite interesting that starts like this. So, forgive always, right? That's the start. If you forgive other people offenses, your heavenly Father will forgive yours, right? That's Jesus by Matthew, right? Okay. So I think that's an easy concept, right? Again, difficult to put in practice, and I know because I went through this weekend with a tiny little thing for something that someone just said to me 1 year ago, and it was so hard to get over, right? And I had it in my mind. I didn't even need to know, right? It was right there. All I needed is to see the person again for it to like come back from inside of me. And I thought, I was like, oh, I'm doing good, right? It's like I'm clear. I'm so elevated spiritually, right? Forget that. I'm still the same person struggling, and it's all there. I was just kind of shoveling and hiding it somewhere in there so I could see it. No one could see it, right? So no matter how serious a neighbor's wrongs may seem, and I'm reading this like I have like this little shivers, right? Because so wrong might seem to be. Do not waste your time on criticism. And I read this for the lecture. I'm like, bang on, like thank you, right? My mentor's great. He's like, send me this stuff, right? Um, condemning strengthen the darkness and set up barriers to serving the light. Bingo. I was so this is so interesting because I was preparing for the lecture, right? During all this whole thing, right? This interaction. And then I read this, and then I'm thinking to myself, so if I'm reading this and preparing for a lecture about this topic, and I'm having a lot of hard time just see, it all comes for a reason, right? It makes that little connection inside of us, right? Regarding victims of evil, look for some good with which you may uplift them. So again, I was actually, without knowing, right, by getting rid of that and helping that person. I mean, I remember we had a flat tire in the ride. I had to actually change his tire. I was actually helping that person. I was actually doing exactly what Emmanuel's telling us here. See? So look for some good of which you may uplift them, right? Just as life performs the miracle of making apparently dead trees green again, right? Before anything else, remember how difficult it is to judge people's decisions concerning experiences that are different from our own, right? Every person has a different experience in life, right? You can't just use your own little ruler and say, okay, this is it, this is that, because you're actually doing the opposite, right? You're being judgmental, you're judging, you're criticizing, right? You're pushing forward that negativity that never escapes, never disappears unless you get rid of it. Remember Chico Xavier when his dog died, and Mino came over, like, you're gonna figure out what your neighbor likes the most, and you're gonna work and you're gonna buy to her and you're gonna give to her. That's the way you're gonna get rid of that negativity that you generated between the two of us. And he did, right? And he describes, giving that gift to the neighbor that actually killed his dog, right? And that made disappear, right? That entire cloud of negativity that was generated between him and the neighbor, and particularly on him, right? And that was affecting his work as a medium, right? So that's exactly what this passage is about, right? So how can we reflect if we appropriate someone else's conscience? And how can we sense reality if we use a heart that does not belong to us? If the world around you cries out in alarm today, remain silent and wait. An appropriate remark is impracticable when fog surrounds us. Tomorrow, when your equilibrium is restored, you will have enough light so that the darkness does not alter your understanding. Moreover, with regard to problems involving criticism, do not think you are beyond criticism yourself. Due to noxious self-complacency, and we do that all the time, almost like a survival mechanism sometimes, you do not notice how often you seem unkind towards others. Bingo, that's me, Marco, here talking. Yes. As much as I try to think that I'm super nice to everyone, I am not, right? And if you think you are, be careful. Maybe you are. Maybe you are in that level of evolution that we all want to be. But I can tell you from my own struggles that, yes, sometimes I'm not kind to people, right? Actually, sometimes more than sometimes, right? But, the first step will be to understand that and to realize that, right? If you're able to do that, I think you're actually many steps ahead of the curve, right? And just tying it up to the whole lecture today, that's the charity part, which is the love in action part, right? So the entire law starts as the law of justice, right? As we learned today, which is actually respecting the right of others, right? Treating others the way you want to be treated, right? The love, which is this whole concept of being uh, benevolent toward others, right? To act in respect, to understand each other's struggles, to to put in practice the concept that Jesus brought to us, which is the same as the justice, which is doing to others what you want others to do to you. And the last part, which is like the action, which is the charity part. So basically, the justice, that's why they're together. Justice, love, and charity, you can kind of blend them into one little thing, which is love one another, basically, by action. So the charity is the action part, and loving one another, you're actually implementing justice, right? That's what justice really is, which is respecting each person. So that's kind of the big summary. If you want to, so for the exam, just remember that last sentence and you'll be fine. Thank you, guys. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marco. It was a great lecture today. Do you have any comments or questions on the internet? Any comments or questions here?
Well, I just have one comment.
Yeah.
You mentioned the atheist that hated God.
Yeah.
Which is a contradiction in itself.
Yes.
You can't hate something
Yeah,
for
that
someone
doesn't
who don't
exist.
believe in.
Exactly.
And those are I'm fine with because that's just human nature. Often hate is a call for help because they want to be loved by God and they don't feel that love.
Yeah.
So I get those.
Yeah.
But I don't get back to the justice that God has to give us. Or the religious folks who have a different idea of God. When I first heard this expression in English, I'd never heard something similar necessarily in Portuguese, was the notion that, yes, that lady she was fine. She just died. She was kind. And she was a God-fearing Christian.
Yes. Yeah.
As that was the thing that we all should be. We should all fear God, and that is our target.
Yeah.
I could never understand it, because if you fear God,
Mhm.
your behavior is driven by the fear of being punished, not because you believe in that. And if you're being charitable because you fear God is going to punish you, and then you're not doing charity. You're not loving.
Yeah.
You're just kind of oppressed, bullied into doing something that you're not ready to do yet.
Yeah. It's not part of you, right? Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's how Brother X has an interesting, he writes, like the books like Chronicles, I can't remember now the title of the book, but Brother X writes describes this visit of Kardec to Umbral, right? And Kardec, one of his moments, he was writing the Spirit's book, the Spirit's taken during his sleep to visit Umbral, and he's asking the mentors at the time, he's asking like, so what are those people here? They're all just like warlords, criminals, and who are these guys suffering here? It's like, no, none of those. Are these the big politicians that make a lot of mistakes? No, they're not here. Are these are these like criminals? They're like criminals all over here. They're like, no. So who are those people, right? Suffering here in the Umbral? Those are religious people that knew the rules and lost their ways. In other words, so that kind of brings that concept that, the idea of the fear to God, and not really living by that love, right? But rather being pushed into believing in something and actually not doing it because it's not part of you, right? So interesting. Yeah.
I was listening to your lecture and also talking about charity, right?
Yeah.
And how being benevolent to others all the time. and actually I'll be talking about this in 2 weeks because we're going to be talking about the law of work and rest, right?
Right, yeah.
And Chico says that you can take vacation, that's no problem, but we can never take vacation from charity,
Yeah, that's true.
right? So charity is not something that you do, oh, because I'm here now distributing soup to the poor, so now I'm doing charity. No, it says charity, don't take vacation from charity. So even when you're on vacation, you need to be charitable to everybody who's around, right? The person who's serving you at the resort, to everybody who's around. So that's what he said to someone one time.
Exactly.
You cannot take vacation from charity, right? It's different from the vacation they would take from work, from the stress of the days, but never from charity, right? Because it's all the time to everybody around us.
Exactly, yeah.
Any other comments? No?
I find interested when he was speaking about we can't escape, we can't turn off our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Because I teach Tai Chi and Qigong, and nowadays mindfulness has grown a lot.
Yes.
And many people come sometimes and it's hard to explain that it's not turn off your thoughts.
Yes.
Like I say, okay, I meditate, I breathe, think about nothing.
Yeah.
And then many people want to stay there.
Yes.
Right? And I say, no, you can't do that 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
That understand that the meditation is you find that state of mind to put a target and solve something that's bothering you, right?
Exactly.
So I find similar what I was talking about. You can block, and it's about changing the action.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. Yeah.
It's true. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments? No? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
All right. So thank everyone that was with us over the internet today. We're hoping having you guys back with us next week.